It's 1968 in Mexico City. The Summer Olympics are underway, and American rivals Tommy Smith and John Carlos have just finished the men's 200-meter final. Smith wins gold, and Carlos wins bronze, behind Australian sprinter Peter Norman. They prepare to go up onto the medal stand. Each of them had on a black leather glove to show the Black Power salute to the world. This was the symbol of the Black Panthers, a more aggressive civil rights group than others at the time. They also wore beads and no shoes to protest poverty and lynchings in Black America. The backlash and hate from this action would haunt them for years and spell the end of their career. This act of taking a stand for equality divided the opinion of the American public for decades to come. The modern civil rights movement began in 1955 with the Montgomery bus boycott, spearheaded by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. These peaceful protesters were inspired by the acts of Mahatma Gandhi, and through their work, they eventually persuaded Congress to pass the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voter Rights Act of 1965. These achievements were some of the largest in the fight for equality since the Emancipation Proclamation was passed over a century before. But there were others who thought that this approach was ineffective. Huey Newton and Bobby Seale were leaders of a more militant civil rights group that believed in more force than Martin Luther King did. They were called the Black Panther Party. This group had famously organized violent riots at the Democratic National Convention in the same year as Carlos and Smith's protest at the Olympics. The Black Panther symbol was the Black Power salute, a raised fist. Many people, still remembering the violence of the riots, associated Carlos and Smith's protest that October in Mexico City with the Black Panther Party and violence. In the 5 months prior to the event, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. had been assassinated, showing the racial tension that ran high for years after the Civil Rights Act had been passed were stronger than ever. Smith and Carlos also did not originally plan the now famous protest. Instead, fellow student at San Jose State College, Harry Edwards, attempted to start a boycott of the game from Black Americans, but it failed to gain support, although he did start the Olympic Project for Human Rights. But they felt as though a message still needed to be sent. They brought a black scarf, a beaded necklace, and one pair of black leather gloves to the games. Smith and Carlos were determined to get to the medal stand and show the world their stance on the treatment of African Americans and the inequality in America at the time. This might have been a factor in Smith setting a new world record that would last for over a decade that night in his race for gold. When the national anthem played, with Smith on the top step of the podium and Carlos on the third, they raised their gloved fists and bowed their heads. The scarf around Smith's neck and the beads around Carlos's symbolized the murders of Black Americans that had not seen justice. Both wore no shoes to protest Black poverty in America. All three athletes on the medal stand, including the Australian sprinter Peter Norman, wore Olympic Project for Human Rights badges, an effort started by their friend from San Jose State College, Harry Edwards, in order to encourage the fair treatment for all through athletes' place of publicity and fame. After the national anthem ended, the stadium erupted in boos, but it was not the Mexicans who were upset. It was the Americans in the stands who had traveled to see the games. This protest also helped cause racial tensions back home to boil over. Millions of Americans were outraged, with the images of the riots at the Democratic National Convention fresh in their minds, and in their eyes the mark of a dangerous civil rights group being portrayed during the playing of the Star-Spangled Banner. Millions more saw the men as brave, to stand up for what they believe in, portraying a message of fairness and equality to the world. They were stripped of their medals the very next day by the Olympic Committee, and their act was called nasty, ugly, and un-American by Time magazine. but Smith says on his website that it was a human rights salute more than anything. Many people were outraged by this demonstration. Both Carlos and Smith received death threats for years. Smith was kicked out of the army, and rocks were thrown through his window and at his baby's crib. They were called black-skinned stormtroopers and Nazis. But in time, many people began to change their mind about the two Olympians, and in 2005, a statue of them on the medal stand was unveiled at San Jose State College, their alma mater. Now, many see the men as heroes instead of villains, standing up for what they believe in. Athletes have continued to use their platform in the public eye to protest injustice, whether for race or politics. Like in 1980, when the United States President Jimmy Carter and the United States Olympic Committee decided to boycott the Moscow Olympics because of Russia's invasion in Afghanistan to prop up what was widely viewed as a socialist government in Kabul. Still, not everyone agrees with sporting protest, even today. This past NFL season, San Francisco 49ers quarterback Colin Kaepernick knelt for the national anthem in his regular season games. Joined by others across the league, this was a protest of police brutality against African Americans, many calling the protest un-American and disrespectful. However, the Black Lives Matter movement, a large civil rights group that organizes protests and works for justice in the African American community, supported Kaepernick in his protest of the treatment of African Americans, as now more and more people across the country join the movement to try and end police brutality and inequality against minorities all across the country. In 1968, Tommy Smith and John Carlos caused one of the biggest sporting moments in the 20th century by taking a stand for what they believed in and dividing the American public's opinion. Even today, we can see in the Black Lives Matter movement and through Colin Kaepernick's protest, people can still not agree. Many people oppose the Black Lives Matter movement the same way many opposed Smith and Carlos in 1968. And even though over the past nearly 50 years since the Olympic stand in 1968, more people have become supporters of protests that shed light on the poor treatment of others, we still have a long way to go before the American public can agree on their support of the 1968 protests by Smith and Carlos and the protests of today.